Cullen goes live in 2 minutes. Lynn Cullen live in 1 minute. Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live at pghcitypaper.com. Email your questions and comments to Lynn at pghcitypaper.com.
Hello and a good morning to you. It is Friday, thank God, the 14th of June. And it has been, as we all know, a very, very busy news week. And we have had no paucity of things to discuss. That will be the case today as well. As you know, today we have a guest. Vic Walczak will not be in the studio with me. He is telephonically going to be joining us. He's one of those people who in Pittsburgh certainly needs no introduction. He is to civil libertarians about as heroic a figure as there can be. He is the legal director of the American Civil Liberties Union of Pennsylvania, and he held that same position here in Pittsburgh for years. He is a fighter for the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, as a matter of fact, a number of amendments. And it seems now that his plate must be so unbelievably full because every time we open up a newspaper, it seems that another one of our cherished liberties seems to be under attack. So let's bring Vic in and start just ticking down all of these threats to our civil liberties, which are in the news these days. Vic, thanks for joining us.
Hi, Lan. If you could see me, I'm blushing.
Oh, Pa.
Thank you for that very kind introduction.
Oh, Pa, you're used to it. You are. Your fame, I was going to say, exceeds you. That was a malaprop. That was a malaprop. So I don't even know where to start. Now, I know when we originally asked you to come on, we were going to talk about voter ID, which seems to pale now with the national, NSA stuff and all this other things going on. But let's start there because that is something that you have worked tirelessly on, and maybe people don't understand that you and the ACLU have really been the leading warrior pushing back against this legislation that came out of Harrisburg for the voter ID in Pennsylvania. So where do we stand?
Yeah, thank you. We fought vigorously last year, and despite a hostile judge, we eventually managed to get an injunction to block the enforcement of voter ID for the November 2012 election. And it may be coincidence, but 2 days after we got the injunction, Mitt Romney pulled all of his funding out of Pennsylvania. And as folks may recall, there was a infamous YouTube clip of Pennsylvania House Majority Leader Mike Turzai from the summer, where he was addressing the Republican faithful and thought that nobody was recording, and he said that voter ID will allow Mitt Romney to win the Pennsylvania election. Now, the ACLU is a non-partisan group. We don't care who wins. We don't care which candidate is going to come out on top. I mean, our only concern is that every voter who is eligible to vote not only be allowed to cast a ballot, but then to have that ballot cast. So, I mean, we thought that was a pretty huge victory last October to block the voter ID law to let everybody vote. Where we are now is that the Commonwealth had agreed to extend the injunction through the recent primaries. So folks may recall at the last two elections, poll workers may have said, "Can I see your ID?" But if you didn't have it or didn't want to show it, they could not prevent you from voting. What happens at the next election and thereafter is still up in the air. It will be a subject of another trial starting on July 15th in Harrisburg. And at that trial, the judge will decide both what happens in the near term for the elections and ultimately whether this law is unconstitutional, as we claim it is.
Now, is the new trial, which is, I guess, just then a month away, is the new trial going to be essentially a repeat of the first trial before the hostile judge?
I think it's going to be similar, but I think in some ways it's going to be also different. The first trial was really about a lot of folks who simply could not get an acceptable photo ID, and the problem. I mean, there's a number of problems with this law, but the first being that the voter ID law only prevents one type of fraud, right? And that is what we call impersonation voter fraud. So I show up and I claim I'm Lynn Cullen and I vote as Lynn Cullen. And you've got folks who support these voter suppression measures saying, "Oh, this is rampant." The problem is that whenever somebody, a researcher has looked into these claims, it turns out not to be voter fraud. I mean, for it to be voter fraud, you have to have somebody who is to vote as somebody else who is intending to do something wrong. Most of the claims that have been found have turned out to not be valid, and if they are valid, in fact, they are mistakes by poll workers or things of that nature. And what happened on the eve of our trial last summer, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania stipulated, that means they agreed in a binding court order, that they were unaware of any of this type of fraud in Pennsylvania. They could not put their finger on not only a single prosecution, but even an allegation of this type of fraud.
Well, Vic, it would seem right there with that stipulation, a judge would just say, well, then what the hell are we doing here? I mean, why is there...
yes, that's what we would hope the judge would say, but that's not what the judge said.
No.
And importantly, the Commonwealth has now updated that stipulation so that when we go to trial in a month, there will be another one that says we are unaware of any impersonation voter fraud either last November or in the most recent primary. So in terms of why we need this law, there ain't nothing there.
What?
There's no justification. On the flip side, what we put on last summer was a parade of individuals who had tried to get the kind of photo ID you need to vote, and for most people it's a PennDOT ID. And since September 11th, there are all sorts of stringent document requirements, including a raised seal birth certificate, original Social Security card, and there, frankly, are people, many people in this Commonwealth who don't have and can't get those documents. And, for instance, a big percentage of those people are African Americans born in the Jim Crow South.
You know,
because,
I have to tell you that
they weren't all that diligent about recording the births of black people. They didn't really care about black people down there. So, you know, if that's a requirement, it's very difficult to meet that. But what the Commonwealth has done since then is said, all right, we recognize that we screwed up here. This makes it a little bit too hard for people to get ID, and we could lose the lawsuit because of that. So they introduced a new ID where initially they said you need fewer documents, and then eventually they said you need no documents. But the problem now is you still have to get to a driver's licensing center.
Uh-huh.
And there's only 67 of them across the state. There's 9 counties that don't have a single licensing center. There's 11 counties where they have a licensing center, but it's only open one day a week. So unless you can get off from work, leave your kids, get out of school, and find somebody who can drive you, because by definition these are folks who don't have licenses, and you can do that between 9 and 4 on a Tuesday or whatever day it's open, you're not going to be able to get that ID. Or if you're a senior citizen living in a nursing home and you can vote right in your home, but you may not be able to go 12 miles through the city to get to one of these licensing centers. So the problem is you've got no reason to have this law, but you're going to have lots and lots of folks who would show up on Election Day who don't have the right kind of ID to vote. So we're talking pretty massive disenfranchisement here.
It's absolutely amazing to me. So, so what are the odds? I mean, it's so politicized, this entire thing, it would seem. Do you know what judge is going to be hearing this next round?
Well, we have been told that the judge who was hearing the case last year will not be hearing the case in July. And it's all kind of odd. He's held on to the case, has made some pretrial rulings, and we apparently will find out next Tuesday, or I guess a week from Tuesday, who our judge is going to be in July. So at this point, we have absolutely no idea. But bottom line is, whoever loses in front of the trial judge is certainly going to take an appeal to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. So ultimately, that court is going to be the final decision maker on whether or not this law is constitutional.
And how does that? What does that tell you about your chances?
Look, you know, I mean, it is political, the whole voter ID and all of the voter suppression efforts. If you look at what's going on across the country, all of the suppression efforts, with one exception, Rhode Island, have been passed by Republican folks.
Yeah.
But what we're also seeing is that when those cases go to trial, you have Republican judges who in some cases are saying that these laws go too far and they're unconstitutional. So, you know, I like to think that and have to believe that our courts have integrity. And I think one example of that is that, you know, after our injunction was denied and folks who sat through the trial, and there was a lot of reporters there, all thought we put on an overwhelming case, a very sympathetic case. We had looked at problems in other cases where challenges had lost, and we felt like we'd patched all those holes, and we put on close to an airtight case, and yet we lost anyway. Mm-hmm. And then you had the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, which at that time had 6 members. I think there was 4 Republicans, or no, I guess it was split 3-3. Republican Democrat, but it was sent back to the judge for a do-over on a 6-0 vote. So the politics didn't prevent that from happening. And then they pretty much tied the judge's hands, so he had to issue the injunction in October. So, I expect that we'll get a fair shot when the case goes back up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court.
Okay. So, there was a letter to the editor in the Post-Gazette, I think, just last week from some guy saying, I don't know a single person who doesn't have an ID. And
right. I saw that letter. It's I've heard that comment 100 times.
I have too.
And what I think what it reflects is a middle class mindset, not a Democrat or Republican or liberal or conservative. Because look, most people have a car. Most people have a driver's license. Most people have one of the forms of ID on there. And cannot imagine getting through life without, frankly, a driver's license or at least some ID to get on a plane or engage in financial transactions. So we understand that. But what folks need to understand is that somewhere between 9 and 12% of the population, and that's across the country, not just Pennsylvania, don't have the kind of photo ID that you need under this law. And if you take 9 to 12% of about 8.5 million voters, you're talking about 1 million people.
Yeah.
And they tend to be folks who are poorer, under 20,000 household income, folks who have low education, folks who live in cities and can use mass transit, senior citizens, many of whom have given up or been forced to give up their driver's licenses, and we're talking to many people just even in the last week as we're looking at witnesses to call to the trial next month, and it's a whole slew of people, and it skews very senior at this point. A lot of seniors who just don't have the kind of ID that you need to vote, and can't get to the DMV.
That's odd because I think of the senior demographic as one that maybe inclines to vote Republican.
Yeah, I think that's right, but I think it also depends where you live. So if you live in a largely Democratic area like Philadelphia, then I would guess that most of your seniors there, by the same percentage as the rest of the population, is going to be voting Democratic. But and I don't know what the census figures would show or any other data. But obviously, one party feels that the folks who don't have ID, if those folks are prevented from voting, it's going to help them.
Yes, that seems to be the implication.
Mm-hmm.
You said two things. You said a long time ago now that the ACLU is a non-partisan organization. I think that might have surprised some folks who heard you say that because the sense of the ACLU is, a bunch of, whacked out lefties, and so you're Democrats or something.
Mm-hmm.
What?
Yeah, I actually think that is the most important element of the ACLU's work, is that we are nonpartisan. As I tell, we use a lot of student interns, and I do a little pep talk for them when they come in, and I tell them that in some ways they have the easiest job because we are the ultimate non-discrimination law firm. So when we get a complaint, we don't care what you look like, who you sleep with, who you pray to, if anybody, who you vote for. All we care about is whether or not your rights have been violated. I had an interesting situation a few years ago where this really kind of hit home for somebody in the right wing. It was one of the KDKA. Am I allowed to say?
Sure. Go for it. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, one of the KDKA conservative hosts, and we had just done a lawn sign case where the municipality says you can't put up a sign on your own lawn, and it's like, really? Why not? It's your property. It's your speech.
Right.
If you can put up a pissing lawn gnome or some of those ugly plastic reindeer, why can't you put up a sign saying vote for whoever you want to put up? And it was a Bush-Cheney sign. This was back in the early 2000s, and this talk show host was incredulous that we had gone to bat for this guy. And truth be told, I had not even asked the client what his sign said, because it doesn't matter. I mean, if you want to put up a message on your own property, we don't care what it says. The point is that it is your right to express yourself on your own property, whatever it is you want to say, and we'll go to bat for you, whatever it is. So, our nonpartisanship we take very, very seriously. As my executive director jokes, I often use the phrase, we are militantly nonpartisan.
Indeed. All righty. So, if we can move on, this NSA stuff has really gotten a lot of people nervous, and a lot of jibber jabber going on, and strange bedfellows being made. I've been tickled by the fact that you have Glenn Beck and Glenn Greenwald in bed together on this one.
Ooh.
I know that. I know. Is that image like enough to? Yeah, I'm sorry if you.
Yeah, we need some better imagery here.
Well, but that shows how. I mean, and then there's this bunch in the middle. Anyway, I know the ACLU has already filed. The National ACLU has already filed a suit, hasn't it?
Yeah. Well, in fact, we filed a lawsuit years ago. During the Bush administration to challenge this program, because you will recall, or many people may recall, that this program initially started without any congressional approval, without any judicial oversight under the Bush administration, and it was some leakers to a reporter at the New York Times that enabled the uncovering of the situation. So, you had this massive spying going on, but it wasn't congressionally authorized, so there was a big hubbub. Congress looked at it, and then Congress, actually, I don't remember exactly when, passed legislation saying this is okay. Now, part of what folks don't seem to understand is that what the Obama administration is doing now was authorized by Congress a few years ago, and certainly not to defend that. Well, the ACLU filed a lawsuit shortly after Congress passed that law, saying that you can gather all this information on who people are calling or where they are, and kind of that metadata. Mm-hmm. And very recently, I think earlier in this term, the U.S. Supreme Court threw that lawsuit out, and the lawsuit was brought on behalf of journalists, on behalf of lawyers, human rights workers. These are all folks who have extensive contacts with people in the Middle East and people in Afghanistan and Pakistan, and folks who likely would be targeted just because they do so much business with people who may be on the fringes of what the government is looking for. And the U.S. Supreme Court threw the case out, saying you can't prove that you're actually being listened to, so you don't have what's known as standing. You can't show an injury. So we did just file a new lawsuit in the last week. But it's essentially the same lawsuit as before, except now we can say, now we can show that you are gathering data on our people, because frankly, the national office is a customer of Verizon, and we now know that they have been gathering all Verizon phone records.
Okay. So the only way, I mean, obviously you have to have this thing wend its way to the Supreme Court, because it is right now legal by virtue of the fact that it is congressionally approved, right? Mm-hmm. So
right.
You've got to prove the whole law is unconstitutional.
I think one of the potential good things about the leak is that it has started a national dialogue.
Yes.
It is one of those issues, and privacy it tends to be the issue where conservatives most often side with the ACLU because we've always been big on privacy.
Right.
But I think that national discussion may prompt Congress to go back. Hopefully, will prompt Congress to go back and take a look at the authorization they've given. One of the things we used to say back in the early 2000s when there was a real split where you had the conservatives who were in power, and every time there was a revelation about a new privacy invasion, the conservatives would say, no, you got to trust us. The liberals, of course, are exercised,
right.
And we'd say, well, think about if you have this power. Someday it may be Janet Reno, and the conservatives hate Janet Reno, or Hillary Clinton, who's going to have this kind of power, and that's exactly what you're seeing now. You're seeing powers that the conservatives approved of when it was one of their own in power,
right.
But now that you've got Barack Obama in the White House, it's not so acceptable, and that's what civil liberties is all about, right? It's the power to abuse people, to invade their rights, to invade their privacy, and you can't look at it as, well, I sort of like this guy or I trust this guy, because that guy's not always going to be there. It's
right.
going to be somebody else, and it's important to have that sort of institutional restraint on whoever's in power.
Vic, I'd like to get a break in, but I want to talk to you about, given our technological age, how and this sense that most people have that privacy, as it used to exist, doesn't exist anymore, and how the Fourth Amendment is going to fare in this brave new age, this technological age of metadata gathering.
Absolutely. Happy to talk about it.
Okay, because that's a huge issue.
It is, and a difficult one, and I'm not
yeah.
sure that the future looks all that rosy.
Boy, I'm with you there. I'm with you there. So, quick break. We'll be back with Vic Walczak, who is, of course, the legal director of ACLU, Pennsylvania.
More is on the way with Lynn Cullen Live.
This week's Pittsburgh City Paper annual health issue is available now. Pick up one today for information on the Three Rivers Arts Festival and Pride Fest. Plus, Kenny G, the Jerry Garcia Symphonic Celebration, Brandy Carlisle, and the Strawberry Festival at Trax Farm. Pittsburgh City Paper available at over 1,700 locations throughout Western Pennsylvania and on the web at pghcitypaper.com and on your smartphone with GPS-enabled listings at citypapermobile.com.
All this rain has made the gardens lush, but I don't know about you. I'm seeing little spots that need changing or that need, I need something there and something here. If you're looking for something for your garden, you cannot go to a better place than the Urban Gardener. The Urban Gardener, 1901 Brighton Road on the north side, very close to the Mexican War Streets, and they've got it all, absolutely all. And on top of that, they have an attitude which is all about being helpful, especially to people with urban gardens, meaning maybe you're doing a lot of container gardening, maybe you've got a lot of shade to deal with, whatever. They will do it all. They'll help you design it. They'll help you take care of it, and they'll help you with anything you might need for it. And here's the great thing. Once you gather up all the wondrous stuff there that they have, and you're ready to check out, say my name. Oh, there's money in it. Yes, Lynn Cullen gets you a discount at the Urban Gardener. Check them out online, urbangardenerpgh.com. I love this place. Maybe I'll see you there, but don't forget, Lynn Cullen sent you.
Packers.
Vikings.
We come from different places.
Uptown.
Downtown.
We come to different conclusions.
Half empty.
Half full.
But when we live united, we make a real difference in the building blocks of life. Children succeed in school, families gain financial stability, the health of our neighbors improves, and suddenly so do our communities. Real change won't happen without you.
Live United.
So give, advocate, volunteer, Live United. Sign up today at liveunited.org. Brought to you by United Way and the Ad Council.
Have a question or an opinion? Call Lynn Cullen at 412-316-3381 or email lynn@pghcitypaper.com. Now, more with Lynn Cullen Live.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what that gentleman just said. Feel free to jump in here with your calls and or emails for Vic Walczak, who is with us, the legal director of ACLU PA. Vic, I'm going to read the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution just so everybody knows exactly what it says. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Well, that worked really well in the 18th century, but we all know now that with technology, with all our so much of our private effects essentially out there in this, in the great beyond, in the World Wide Web, as we used to say, it's all out there. And to think that a government or a big business or, Giant Eagle or anybody isn't going to be trolling through all of that data about us so that they can do what it is they want to do there's no way it's not going to happen. How does the Fourth Amendment survive the internet age?
Well, first, I think you gotta look at this in kind of like two halves. First of all, as Lynn, the Constitution is a restraint on government power, right? So if AT&T or Target or Walmart want to gather information on you that may be kind of creepy because it's private, the Fourth Amendment doesn't prevent that. The Fourth Amendment only applies to government at whatever level of government power.
Right.
So let's start with sort of the non-civil liberty side of it, which is when you're talking about corporate America. People give up an incredible amount of information voluntarily.
Right.
Whether it's to Amazon or, just think about all these online retailers. And, it's amazing to me that, there used to be very strict restrictions on who could get a Social Security number, right? And there's there's really only certain places that are kind of authorized to get Social Security numbers. And as a reporter a long time ago told me that with a date of birth and a full name, you can uncover a lot of information about a person. If you add that Social Security number, you can get virtually everything
Correct.
On that individual. And yet, people are asked for Social Security numbers in situations where the asker has no right to be doing that, and people just give it up without thinking about it.
Well, it's how we're identified by our health insurer. It's how we're identified by, it seems to me, we're used to giving it out.
Right. It's close to a national identity
exactly
number.
Right.
It's not quite, but it's pretty close. And the problem is that when there's not a whole lot you can do if people are willing to give up information to strangers or to corporate America. And once you give it up, there are few limits on what can be done with that information. So, you don't think that all these companies share? In some cases are affiliated. There's all the stories you hear about laptops being stolen and the data compromised, whether it's from big business or the government. And so, true privacy is vanishing very, very quickly. Let's flip over to the sort of the government side where the Fourth Amendment does apply. And for years, civil libertarians have joked or winced that the Fourth Amendment was being written out of the Constitution. Under the Berger and the Rehnquist courts, and certainly continued under the Roberts court, the protections of the Fourth Amendment were being rationalized away.
Such
right?
as
so
what?
everything seemed to be a reasonable search, and there was some reason why the government didn't need to get a warrant or show probable cause. But I think we are starting to see a situation where maybe even for the conservatives on the court, it's gone too far. And perhaps surprisingly to some folks, one of the justices
Scalia.
that is standing up more vigorously is Justice Scalia.
Right. And wasn't that in a recent DNA case? Was that where Scalia went a little nuts? I mean, because he ended up in a minority with the three female jurists.
Right.
But
Yeah,
that
was. It's a law where if you get arrested,
right,
for a serious crime, that they can take your DNA,
right,
and they say they need it for identification, but they don't really need it for identification. I mean, you can do that through fingerprints. If you need it in a particular situation, you can get a warrant to get it. This they do just as a matter of course. Once you're picked up. And even if you are, so let's say you're picked up and it's a case of mistaken identity and you're released the next day, they've still got your DNA and it's stored. And they don't just get rid of it because they made a mistake or you are acquitted of the charges. You actually have to jump through many hoops and potentially even have to get a lawyer to be able to have that DNA destroyed. So the government doesn't have it, and so then whenever there's a crime, your DNA is gonna be part of that huge database that gets matched.
Well, so what I'm asking is, given this recent data mining operation that we're now much more aware of, that the government is engaged in regard to trying to ferret out any terrorists out there, which is what their reason is, supposedly, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Well, what about the president's remark that there has to be, a little bit of encroachment here if you want security?
Well, I'm pretty sure that argument's been made before.
Yes.
There's a famous saying. I'm going to butcher it, so I'm going to try to paraphrase it.
I butchered it earlier.
He who would trade liberty for security
deserves neither.
Right, deserves neither or will lose both or something like that. And I've tried to track that down, and it's variably attributed either to Jefferson or Franklin.
Okay.
Either way, it's pretty, those are pretty upstanding people. But, yeah, the security is the enemy of freedom and privacy.
Yes. In
that sense.
And
it really was September 11th, which really was a frightening event. I think it rocked everybody's world, whether you were sort of directly impacted because you had a family member or a friend or not. I think it really, it rocked people. I know it rocked me. But that was used to justify a whole host of very intrusive government programs that allowed them to spy on people. And the problem with this sort of war on terror is it's not a war that's ever going to be won.
Right.
It's like a war on organized crime, right? You can do better, you can do not so well, you can suppress it, but you're never going to eliminate it, and we're never going to eliminate terrorism. No matter how hard we try, no matter how much we eliminate our liberties. But the scary thing is that you've got pretty much whoever is in power saying the same thing. We need more power because if we don't do this, you're going to get hurt. Your security is going to be compromised. So it's the same argument. The ACLU, as soon as the Patriot Act was passed, that was right after the Twin Towers came down, was when people were the most frightened.
Right.
And we were out there with, I think, one politician, Russ Feingold, I think was the only one standing up with us saying, do you realize what we're doing? We're opening ourselves up to exactly what we're seeing today, where the government literally monitors every phone call that we make.
Yeah. Can I read something to you from the Wall Street Journal today?
Is that a reputable publication?
Well, it's from the editorial page, so maybe that answers your question.
So I don't really have to buy it.
Okay.
Okay.
But listen to this, because this is what the other side is. The Fourth Amendment restricts unreasonable searches on individuals, but imposes few limits on collection and analysis, and technologies have no privacy rights. The NSA is screening the data system in general for conduct that threatens the security of the system, not targeting any particular individual or group using the system. The right comparison is a cop on the beat who patrols public spaces. He's not investigating a crime or enforcing a law. He's watching for suspicious behavior.
It is that statement is frightening in its ignorance. I'm sorry. They're wrong historically. They're wrong legally. The Fourth Amendment was passed to prevent what they call general warrants, which was something bad happens, right? A British soldier gets killed by a colonist. And the court would issue a warrant for to authorize the search of any house the soldiers thought might house somebody who did harm to the British soldier, right? And so it really was a restraint on this kind of group search, this group fishing expedition, and required the government to actually have individualized suspicion that a person had committed a wrong or was about to commit a wrong or had some contraband on them. And then once you had that suspicion, you had to take that to a neutral arbiter, like a judge, and get a warrant. Mm-hmm. So, and if you think about those principles, none of those can justify what the government is doing now, because it is a group search. It is a fishing expedition, not based on any kind of probable cause. So I'm sorry. I guess now I know there's a reason why I don't regularly read that paper.
Is the FISA court a neutral arbiter?
It's something, but it's not enough. I mean, this is a court that is completely secret. Apparently, the order that Snowden released is the first one that's ever been publicly disclosed. I actually think there may have been a couple of others that the court purposely let out, but the court operates completely in secret. We had a situation some years ago, we being the ACLU, where what they were doing is impacting something we did, and we wanted to file an amicus brief with the court, mm-hmm. right? A friend of the court brief to let them know our views on that, and we couldn't even figure out how to do that. I mean, you can't see what papers are filed. You can't see what arguments the government's making. You can't see the decision of the FISA court. You can't see the rationale for doing it, and it really is a star chamber. So, and the problem is that it has been expanded largely through the Patriot Act, so that it's not now limited just to foreigners, right, to foreign nationals. It now also makes decisions in matters involving United States citizens. So, the power and scope of the FISA court has grown tremendously. Presumably, it's better than nothing, but frankly, it's not clear why federal judges, who do not operate in secret, and in the extreme circumstance where secrecy is warranted, can do so. I mean, it's not clear why the federal courts can't perform the same role.
Yeah.
And then you have oversight. And when you have oversight, you have sunshine, you have accountability. And FISA court is completely unaccountable.
Well, you can see, though, why some argue that when you're dealing with national security, however, sunshine sometimes is not possible because then our enemies also know things we don't want them to know.
Right, and that is absolutely true. The problem is that the powers that have been given to the FISA court, the authority, the jurisdiction, has been so expanded after September 11th because you've got leaders of both political parties saying, "Oh my gosh, we're all going to die. The sky is falling. We have to be more secret. We have to have more power. We have to be able to invade your privacy without telling you." And that power continues to grow, and to the point where now they can violate the rights and invade the privacy of United States citizens. When FISA first started out, it was only about doing things overseas. It was only about foreign nationals, and that's no longer the case.
Mm-mm. Hey, did you see something yesterday? I'm changing the subject. That the Supreme Court put out some kind of ruling, U.S. Supreme Court, saying that you cannot demonstrate on their grounds?
I did.
Now, is that like the most bizarre? I mean, the Supreme Court telling Americans they cannot demonstrate?
Yeah, there's actually a long history behind that. There was they had a previous law going back, I think, to the 70s or 80s. I guess it started out with, it was very broad and included the sidewalks along, that's First Avenue, Third Avenue, I can't remember, by the court. And the court rightfully said, no, you cannot restrict protest on the sort of the sidewalks along the street outside the Supreme Court. Then what happened is they still had restrictions on, like going up the steps of the court or on court grounds. And that had been the subject of litigation for years and years and years. And finally, recently, a lower court held that was unconstitutional. And yesterday, I think within a day of that lower court decision, the Supreme Court issued this regulation saying that nobody can engage in any kind of political protest on any of the court grounds. So it's not the sidewalk that they can't touch, but it's the court grounds. And as I was observing to some of my law professor friends last night, there is absolutely no way to reconcile that decision with many, many cases handed down by the U.S. Supreme Court, where they've said, look, even if it is not a traditional public forum like a regular sidewalk or a park, it's just public space around a building, the government's ability to restrict political speech is limited. So you can't, for instance, prevent leafleting, you can't prevent picketing, you can prevent solicitation, oddly enough, but I looked at that regulation and said, boy, if the Supreme Court hadn't issued this, and if the Supreme Court isn't ultimately the one who's going to be ruling on this, this would be dead in the water.
Well,
it's so unconstitutional.
So how do you, there's no recourse here, is there, since you would be appealing to the court that just made, it's beyond belief to me.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, because I'm sure somebody's going to challenge it, and for all I know, we may challenge it. But it's going to be very interesting because, you're talking about a rule issued by the court and asking the court to rule on its own rule.
I mean, I did such a double take when I saw that. Okay, so also the court yesterday, I believe, in a unanimous ruling, said that you cannot patent, a gene. Our DNA is not something that can.
Well, you can't patent something that's found in nature.
Found in nature, but if there's any fiddling with it, then you can. I mean, if you create something slightly new or artificial. So I assume that the ACLU is okay with that ruling?
Well, it's funny you should say that because, and I'm pissed at the New York Times, because, that case actually was brought by the ACLU on behalf of women, on behalf of researchers who claimed that it was a violation of the First Amendment to prohibit other people from being able to do research on that gene and make use of that gene because it is something that's found in nature. So that actually, a good friend of mine, Chris Hansen, actually argued that case in the Supreme Court a couple of months ago. So, yeah, we're not only okay with it, we're thrilled because it's our case.
Okay. Well, good. I mean, I think women unnecessarily were dying as a result of the inability to have these tests available to them at a reasonable cost.
Well, I'm not sure because the tests are extremely expensive. You're talking about $3,000.
Right.
You don't have health insurance to cover that. There's a lot of women who are not going to be able to afford that. And one of the repercussions from this decision is that the cost of that test should come down dramatically as you get some competition in the marketplace.
Exactly. I want to move to another issue, and that is reproductive rights. This is something that the ACLU also cares mightily about. And I see a report from the ACLU that says this year is on track to be a record-breaking year for state-level restrictions throughout the United States on women's reproductive rights. And anybody who's sort of following this can see that even though supposedly abortion is legal in this country, increasingly it is becoming unavailable. So how is something legal if it then becomes unavailable? I don't understand how all of these restrictions are constitutional. It's beyond me. I don't understand it, Vic.
Oh, I'm with you, Lynn. I wish I could help you out there. Because, look, and because abortion is still recognized as a constitutionally protected right. I mean, it's the decision as to whether or not to terminate a pregnancy is between the woman who actually is bearing the child. And as my wife always points out, that the men get the better end of the deal.
Oh, yeah.
In that whole process, but it's between a woman and her physician and her family and anybody else she wants to involve. But it's ultimately it is the woman's right, and yet,
but it's not anymore.
As our report shows, there's a huge number of restrictions. I mean, Pennsylvania is one of the worst offenders. I mean, in last year they passed legislation that required all abortion clinics, and the attacks are in many places, including Pennsylvania, are not kind of a full frontal assault. I mean, they're trying that in places like South Dakota and Mississippi. And there's, I think, a Midwestern or Western state that wants to kind of like ban all abortions after like 5 weeks, which is before you can even find out that you're pregnant in most cases. But in Pennsylvania, what they did last year was they passed a law saying that all abortion clinics have to meet the standards of ambulatory surgical facilities. And that's nonsense because what you're talking about is real kind of hospital type care and standards. It's like, would you apply that to the maxillofacial, I think that's how you say it, surgeon who's pulling your wisdom teeth?
Yeah.
And there's absolutely no reason to do that. And the only result of that is that some clinics have had to close because they could not afford to make the changes, which could run into the millions of dollars, and others are having to shell out, a huge amount of money to put in certain width elevators and have certain amount of ventilation.
Right.
In their surgical facilities, and they have to be certain size. I mean, it's
harassment, is what it is. Harassment designed to close these clinics down, and it's been very successful.
I mean, fortunately, it hasn't been quite as successful as they had hoped because the clinics have somehow managed to, or are managing to, make the changes that they need. But I mean, more recently, you've seen the legislation that prevents the new health exchanges from funding any abortions. And the really outrageous part of all this is that you've got the proponents of these restrictions saying, no, we haven't changed anything. We are just putting into law and updating the law and not changing it at all so that it applies to these new exchanges. And that's complete and utter nonsense, because this law goes way further, because it bans the use of even private funds. So it's long been the law that the government's not going to pay for abortions. I mean, that goes back, I think, to the late 70s, early 80s. But this actually would ban even private money. So you're buying your own health insurance. The government is not paying for that. And this is going to ban them from paying for those abortions. And the proponents, again, of these restrictions say, oh, well, you can go out and get special insurance in case you need an abortion. Well, I mean, abortions typically take place when you have an unplanned pregnancy.
Yeah.
Right?
So,
how many people are going to, I'm pretty sure I'm going to need an abortion in the next 5 years, so, maybe I better go out and buy the supplemental insurance coverage.
Okay,
I mean, it's ridiculous. And again, it is designed to undermine women's ability to get abortions. And what's so cynical and hypocritical about all this is that you take your most staunch conservative politician out there, and if somebody in his family needs an abortion, you can be sure that they're going to get one.
Yeah.
Right? There's not going to be an issue. So this really is an attack on the women who don't have connections and who don't have the kind of money that they can readily go out and get an abortion.
Okay. But I still don't, I'm sorry, I don't understand how the law of the land is abortion is a legal medical procedure. And as you said, the people who have standing are the woman, her doctor. And yet, if you cannot access the procedure, it's not. How's that legal?
Yeah, and all I can tell you is that legal challenges to these restrictions have been mixed to poor.
Really?
Yes, and this is not my area. I'm right. Far from an expert in this area, but I know enough to know that the challenges are difficult. I mean, we're kind of taking a look at this exchange restriction here in Pennsylvania, but I know there's at least one other case out there that has not fared well in challenging a similar restriction.
Okay. I have one more issue, and that's local, and it was in today's paper. There is this panel that the police have, made up of the police, that looks over and evaluates potential recruits to the department. And it had been found out, I think, a year or so ago that a convicted felon was sitting on the panel. Do you recall that?
I do, because we actually have a lawsuit against the city of Pittsburgh on this issue.
I thought so. Have you seen the makeup of the new panel and the officers who are on that panel?
We have not. I did, of course, see the story in the Post-Gazette today, which was all about all these police officers who have either had some criminal charge problems or they've been found liable in civil rights lawsuits of violating citizens' constitutional rights. And so it's not exactly a spotless group that they've assigned to pick police officers. The issue that the ACLU has challenged the city on is that there seems to be a lot of hanky-panky going on with these oral boards. And the bottom line is that at the end of the day, Pittsburgh over the last 12 or 13 years has hired only 4% African Americans. They've hired only, I think, 15% women. And demographics are way different. I mean, obviously, the women in the population are about 50%, and African Americans in Pittsburgh are about 27%. So there's just no way to justify or to explain how the city can be hiring so few people of color and women. And the oral boards are one part of what is like a 6 or 7 step process.
Right.
But as we've looked at it, it seems like the kind of games they play with these oral boards are occurring at every phase of the selection process.
Well, Vic, I thank you for spending all this time with us because I can't imagine how busy you are these days.
Well, it's actually the first day I've been in town for about a week, and it's always a pleasure to talk to you,
Vic.
Lynn.
Thank you, and thank you so much for the great work you do on behalf of all of us. Thanks a million.
Well, thank you. You guys have a good weekend.
You too.
Right,
Bye-bye.
bye-bye.
That's Vic Walczak of the ACLU, the legal director of the ACLU PA. He's really one of the best nationally. He's a hell of a lawyer and a hell of a guy. So that was a little bit of an update on some of the issues that are on his table these days. I have to get a break in here. We'll be right back.
Stick around for more with Lynn Cullen Live after this.
Hi, I'm LeVar Burton, and I'm proud to be a book person. How do I choose a book? Sometimes it's the cover, sometimes it's the title. I guess I'm pretty visual. If a book's really impressing me and the writing is really good, I will peek and see what the last paragraph is, because the endings of books should rock you. I am a book person, and if you're a book person too, read to a child and spark a lifetime of ambition. Join me at bookpeopleunite.org because reading is fundamental. A public service announcement brought to you by Reading is Fundamental, Library of Congress, and the Ad Council.
Go to bergbargains.com for great deals on gift cards from your favorite local restaurants, bars, museums, attractions, and shows. This week, great deals on Jerome Bettis Grill vouchers. Supplies are limited. bergbargains.com, Pittsburgh's best bargains. bergbargains.com.
Now, it's back to Lynn Cullen Live at pghcitypaper.com.
Okay, we're back. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I expected more input from you guys, but sometimes I guess, I don't know, you're just sitting there and listening, which is okay. Okay. I don't think I have anything else, and we're essentially out of time. I thank you for joining us today, and tomorrow is Saturday, isn't it? Okay, good. And I think next week we have our usual ducks in a row, except Sokolowski will not be here next Thursday. But we hope to get Chris Potter back in the saddle on Wednesday and my sister on Tuesday. And, well, as I said, there's never a shortage of news stories for us to mull and sometimes argue over. So I don't know about you, but I'm taking the weekend off. I swear, do not believe me when I say I am not going to open a newspaper. Yeah, I will. I can't help it. I am totally addicted, but yowie. Okay, you guys, I guess that's it. And thanks. Toodaloo.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper, Steel City Media, and its advertisers.